Transporeon has just completed its annual carrier survey. We're going to be talking about the results of that and with my guest today, Patrick Pretorius. He is Director of Business Development with Transporeon. Patrick, welcome.
Thanks, Bob. Good to be here.
First of all, tell me a little bit about the survey. How many carriers do you survey and a little bit about how you conduct it?
Yeah, so we use our TMS procurement module, TI contract, to conduct the survey. Our procurement tool has a massive global database of carriers, and we conduct the survey around the world. This particular one was in the North American market, sent to over 4,000 of the carriers that are registered in our platform for predominantly USA, Canada, and Mexico. And we asked them questions about the market on an annual basis, what they see coming down the line, and what the trends are, what the issues are that are bothering them, what they see in the technology space, and of course a little bit about their company so we can know who we're talking to as well.
And with regard to mode, is it multimodal or are they in a particular mode that you focus on?
The tool is multimodal, but this particular survey was focused on predominantly full truckload, asset-based carriers doing, the regular type of over-the-road transportation in North American market.
Okay. So one of the key elements of the survey, as I understand it, is the carrier outlook on pricing.
Exactly.
What did that reveal?
Very, I'd say, interesting, but also in line with what our expectations would have been. So compared to 2018, where over 92% of respondents predicted rate increases, you think about things like the capacity crunch, the ELD mandate last year, everyone had the same concepts in mind. This year, just under 50% of the respondents predicted increases in price, anywhere from kind of 1 to 5% year over year, which is a pretty significant drop compared to last year. But as I say, could have been expected. Most people predicted that. Mm-hmm. What is also interesting to us is that, that outlook may actually seem a little bit overly positive even from the carriers, because we have our procurement platform, and looking at the data that has come out of the RFPs that we've done in Q1 and Q2 this year, we are actually seeing more of a double-digit rate dip. And that's for annual contracts year over year.
Really?
Yeah.
So the prediction is a slight increase, and yet it's quite the opposite in terms of what you're seeing. How do you explain that gap?
Well, I think the carriers, have to protect their interests, and to a certain extent want to maybe justify the rate increases that they'll be looking for. They've invested a lot of money in new assets. At the tail end of last year, you look at the order books from a lot of those carriers. Orders for 53-foot dry vans were at some of the highest that they'd ever been last year. So, I think there's always a dichotomy between what the shippers expect, what the carriers forecast, and then what actually takes place.
Sure.
But sure. I'd say the outlook potentially, again, a little bit more over-optimistic from the carriers compared to what's actually coming out in the contract negotiations.
So as a result of all this, has the capacity crunch been alleviated somewhat?
We're seeing that for sure. Yeah. I mean, I think this is the result of the alleviation of the capacity crunch. Mm-hmm. The two most highly ranked factors in the results of the survey were those of overcapacity and lack of demand this year. Last year, those two factors were ranked at the absolute bottom. So I think it tells you a completely different story of what the market is doing this year compared to last year. And I think the results speak for themselves.
Now, earlier this year, there were reports that shippers that had signed agreements with guaranteed volume and capacity contracts, they were backing away from those agreements and looking for better deals. Is that still happening?
Well, it is happening. I mean, again, the carriers in the survey, it's about a 2/3 to 1/3 split. So about 2/3 of the carriers are saying that their shipper clients are sticking to the contracts that they negotiated last year. And a third of them are saying that they're seeing customers back out of contracts and head to the spot market. Mm-hmm. So you can see there's a different approach from different types of shippers, how aggressive they are. But from our perspective, maybe that's a slightly less strategic approach, right? Because the market flips one way, it flips the other way, it flips back. And so I think what a lot of shippers are realizing now is the importance of maintaining those relationships and sticking to the agreements that they have with their carriers through the long haul, despite what the market may be doing, so that the next time this type of issue rolls around, they'll be in, let's say, good graces with their carrier base.
Well, shippers always talk a good game about wanting to establish long-term relations with their providers, and when it comes down to the actual price, and it sometimes often is quite a different thing.
Absolutely.
And so carriers are actually seeing that their protestations or their claims of long-term relationships don't always hold true, right?
It's true, they don't. So the respondents are about 2/3 and 1/3, as I said, but we take that as actually a generally positive sign, to be honest. Yeah.
Do shippers pay a price when they walk away from these guaranteed contracts? Is there a penalty to be paid, or is it simply I'm not going to pay that, I'm going to pay this in the spot market instead?
I think they just flip over to the spot market, and
there's no penalty.
There's not that we're aware of. I'd say when you buy at scale, and in my experience in the ocean freight industry, people do look for those kind of, they call them a bonus malus clause. Where if you don't meet up with your minimum order quotient, there may be a penalty drawn up in the contract, but we don't predominantly see that in the North American truck market.
One of the big issues in transportation today is so-called digital transformation. To what degree are carriers actually embracing that?
Interesting question. They certainly are recognizing nowadays the capability for these technologies to assist them, especially when it comes to planning and hours of service. So we've seen a lot of interest from shippers in the time slot management or dock scheduling, different word for the same thing, capabilities. And what the carriers love about that is that it enables them to know exactly when to show up, exactly how long they're going to be at a customer's premises, and then exactly when they'll be able to hit the road again. So that enables them to really effectively plan their day around their hours of service and keep their wheels on the road, so to speak. And so I think for that reason, carriers are kind of embracing technology a little bit more than they may have in the past, where it's still a very heavily, let's say, relationship-driven industry, isn't it? So there's a hesitation historically when it comes to technology, but they're starting to realize the benefits, so to speak. We also ask the carriers if they're pushing technology down into their subcontractor base, and if they're using technology to help them with their assets that may not be under their management, but through subcontractors or if they're a broker, etc. We see a lag there for sure. So while they're recognizing the capabilities that shippers are bringing to them, they're not necessarily yet embracing the technology themselves and passing it along to their subcontractors. So we call this a lag. There's a technology lag between the actual shipper and the eventual asset owner, and some of the shippers kind of recognize that, and so they're the ones that are really leading the charge into this technology space with things like digital insourcing, if you will. Yeah.
I want to ask you about that phrase in a moment. I just want to follow up very quickly, though. You're saying that there are other aspects, there are other carriers complaining that shippers themselves are the ones that are holding back on digitization, on the sending bills of lading, for instance, in a digital form as opposed to a paper form.
Right.
So shippers have something to be responsible for too in that regard as well.
Absolutely true. I mean, as a person responsible for business development in technology for logistics, I have to say that I'm still often shocked or astonished when you could be speaking to pretty large size shippers managing thousands of lanes, hundreds of thousands of annual shipments that are still using Excel spreadsheets or booking freight over the phone and stuff like that. So there's a ways to go for sure. And I think, as you pointed out, both parties have both the responsibility and the desire now, I would say, to look into what technology options are out there. Yeah.
Okay, so I just heard that phrase, digital insourcing.
Right.
Could you define that for me, please?
Sure. So it's a phrase that we use to, let's say, describe an approach to processes that tends towards insourcing, so bringing back the control, bringing back the relationships, let's say mitigating risk, etc., more to the shipper side of the conversation, but relying a little bit more on technology, basically, to enable you to do that, as opposed to, let's say, having to spend a ton of capex on new assets or hiring a lot of new people. Technology enables you to navigate that line between in-house and outsourced, but with a lesser number of assets, if you will. Yeah. So, I mean, outsourcing, we all know what it is. It's been around for decades now, and it was viewed as a kind of a cure-all. Is this category a core competency of mine? If not, I'll outsource it. And so we're not just talking about logistics. It could have been anything, finance, legal support, facility management. But what a lot of companies are realizing is as we know, how important the logistics category really is and supply chain in general, because it's where you may have that last touch with your end customer, whether you're B2B or B2C, and you want to make that as smooth a handover as possible. So a lot of companies are saying now, well, maybe outsourcing all of this wasn't the best idea. And the ones that had a very heavily outsourced model may have suffered more under the capacity crunch because they didn't have the relationships with the carriers. They didn't have the, let's say, early knowledge advantage of knowing what was coming down the line because somebody else was taking care of all of that for them. And so they're looking at technology as a way to, bring those processes back in-house, basically. Yeah.
Patrick, I want to thank you for giving us such good insight into what carriers are thinking these days based on the Transporeon annual carrier survey. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you too, Bob. It's been great. Appreciate it.
I have been speaking with Patrick Pretorius of Transporeon. Thank you very much for watching.